The African Union has joined a campaign called Correct the Map. The Mercator map isn't just about misrepresenting the size of the global south. It's about power and perception. It needs to change the map to one which more accurately reflects the true size of Africa. Let's look now at how the 1884 Berlin Conference resolution can be reversed and how the continent can claim its correct size and representation on maps. I'm joined by Thebe Ikalafeng, founder of Brand Africa. Thebe, always good to speak to you. Now, we're talking about Africa Reunion debuting at the F&B Art Joburg. Let's put all of that into context.
Well, I think what we wanted to do at this art fair this time around is to take African agency, for Africa to be able to tell its own story. And I think what we did differently is we didn't just focus on the size. We actually also focused on who around the table is making the decision about how Africa should be represented. And that's what we tried to do with the Africa Reunion artwork, which we launched at the 18th Joburg Art Fair.
Now, when we talk about the Mercator map, or the Mercator projection created in the first place, and what problem was it designed to solve?
Well, the first part is if you look at the colonial era approach and using the Mercator approach, it in many ways it tried to diminish how Africa is projected and how Africa is seen almost at the bottom and diminished in size. And now by looking at the equal Earth approach, that puts Africa in its proper perspective, both from a size and just how from a size and location of the continent relative to all the other continents. And I think with the equal Earth projection approach, you can see that Africa is much bigger than it has always been projected over the years. But that is just one aspect of the continent. But it's also a very important aspect because it's a visual manifestation of the continent.
Thebe, you talk about Africa being much bigger. Now, put it into context for us, right? Just how big is Africa projected at the moment versus its actual size?
Well, there's probably two parts to it. First is if you look at from a height perspective, it's much taller and much narrower to the top, and it's also much broader in size. People have said that in the continent you can fit in a few other continents into it. Just gives you an idea how much bigger the continent is. It is always said that it's the second biggest, largest continent, but it probably is the biggest continent in the world.
Now, you talk about Africa telling its story, and the question is, who is listening to Africa telling its story? So where is this communication designed to go? I'd imagine that the rest of the world, but also the implications that it has on young people on the continent, almost give them a realization of just how big Africa is.
Well, there's two parts to it. From a geographic perspective, if you look at from a cartographic design of the map, so in this instance, it will be showing the size of the continent correctly in all maps and in everything relating to the continent. That is more a cartographic approach or geographic approach to where this all is going. And once that is done, Africa will be able to see physically to be much bigger than it always has. But from a philosophical perspective, it also speaks to how we relate to the continent. There's a continent that's magnanimous, a continent that is strong and larger in size and has been. And that's why if you look at the work that we presented at the art fair, it is not just the map in itself, because in Africa, we're not just about things. It is about who has been around the table to shape the narrative of the story. Where all this started for us was in 1884. When 1884 in the Berlin Conference, when Western forces decided to annex the continent and divide it into pieces for themselves, rename us, give us new names, give deep meaning that is related to their economic interests in the continent. What we tried to do this time is said, we're not going to go back to 1884. We're going to reset our own table. We're not going to get back onto the table because we want to take agency in where the continent is going. So that's what I'm saying from a philosophical perspective. It's around the table. We brought in a multi-generational representation. We brought people from Sojourner Truth, who's the first slave to escape in the U.S. You've got W.E.B. Du Bois, the first African American who emigrated to Ghana, the first PhD graduate from Harvard. You've got Thabo Mbeki, you've got Damiswa Moyo, who sits in the House of Lords in Britain now, and she's from Zambia. You've got somebody like Zuleka Patel, who's like 23 or so. So we brought in a multi-generational voices. Miriam Makeba from the arts, Chimamanda Adichie from literature, Muammar Gaddafi, who proposed the idea of a United States of Africa. Mbeki, who spoke about the idea of an African Renaissance. K. Kenneth Kaunda, who spoke about humanism. So we brought multiple voices around the table, and we said, these are the people who should be speaking to the story of Africa. And if you show the map, people will see that there's also one seat left open, because in our proposal of the African reunion, there should always be an open seat for the unborn child, for the ancestor who didn't have an opportunity, for the future, for the present African to be able to join that table and be an architect of the future of the continent.
You speak of some incredible names, great icons that are speaking this message. But on the other side of the conversation, obviously, is the power of art in relaying the very same message. Just walk us through that journey of how art will send the right message.
Well, it's always been said that, art disrupts the comfortable, or the comfortable. And in this instance, we wanted to disrupt the people who are very comfortable with the idea of Africa, how it is, but also art is a tactile, it's tangible. You now be able to see and relate to what it is you're talking about, because we can talk about Africa in words, but until you see it physically, visually, you'll not be able to tell the story. And I think the power of seeing the convention of the people around the table and the empty chair is a very powerful a metaphor in terms of taking agency as a people and as a continent. And only art can do that. Geography will just give you an inanimate map. But the way we delivered the idea with the total, with the complete team around the table. And we also made a table round, if you recall. And the reason we made a table round is because we want to make sure that everybody understands that around this table, as Mandela once said about his table at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, everybody's voice is equal. So it was about equal voice, but also about equal buying into the equal agenda of the continent.
Now, speaking of agenda, the continent is 54 or so countries. How important it is that you are reaching out to individuals from various countries on the continent, and how will this assist in uniting Africa, if you will?
What we did, which is incredible in this process, we removed the three or the few things which have always been the reason for the disunity of the continent. And the first one is the borders, which were imposed on us, and we didn't just decide them. The names, we removed the names. We removed the tribes, because we know what the tribes have got. They've caused genocides in multiple countries. We've removed the religion. So we've decided the map must be manifest only in its natural truths, and the natural truths are the borders, which are created by the natural waterways and the mountains. So if that is a blank slate from which Africa is communicating or charting its own future, and we have a multi-generational and representative convention and an open chair for anybody who wants to join this convention, what you are then saying to the rest of the continent is that no one person around the table is completely solve the story of the continent unless all of us come together. And I think what this says about bringing Africans together, it just speaks to that idea that this is your Africa. If you want to chart the next chapter of the continent, then join the table. But this table, different from the one in 1884, this is our table. We're not joining any other table, because unfortunately, as a friend of mine said, as we're working through, Mark Mudimula, who worked with me on the map, as we spoke about this idea, that if you join a table which you didn't set, unfortunately, you are on the menu. So this time, we are not on the menu. We are setting the table on our own terms.
Now, we talk about our own terms, and one of the issues, I think, that I'd imagine that you face is some form of resistance. What resistance are you facing on the continent before we even talk about the rest of the world? Because that Berlin 1884 conference speaks to a coming together of the West in deciding or parceling out the continent of Africa. Are they receptive to this?
Well, we launched this on the 4th of September at the Art Fair in Joburg. We're going to take this around the continent first. We're going to take it, we're exploring, taking it to the G20 in November, where people will be convening in Africa. We're exploring taking this to the Senegal Biennale. We're exploring this. The story will go out. But what we've done differently from anything else about art that's been done, we've decided not to auction this map. I decided that the thing that I want to do with this map is to gift it to the University of South Africa, which is the biggest university university in the continent, over 400,000 students, but it's also the most Pan-African university with a Pan-African message. By gifting it to the university, the original artworks, we're ensuring that this conversation will carry on into future, but also find expression in academia and all this. And that's why we did. That's what we did this. I don't think we're facing any opposition. I mean, working with very strong partners in this. We are working with Africa No Filter out of London, which is one of the teams that have been advocating for this, for the correcting of the size of the map. We're working with Johannesburg Art Gallery in South Africa, which is an institutional partner of institutional agency of South Africa, to really correct the story of Africa through art. So we're working. We get the support of institutions like Brand South Africa. We're supporting this mission. So I do not think we are going to face any opposition. This is still new. What opposition will there be? We cannot oppose Africans taking responsibility for their own future. And this is just one contribution from one angle. There will be many other contributions to where this continent should be going. But we all know by 2063, we are speaking of a continent that is integrated, that is peaceful, and that's prosperous. And the only way to do that is to remove the obstacles to that. And that is the borders, that is the names, that is the religion, and that is the tribes that have caused so many of the problems that we've had in the continent.
Well, Thebe, I'm sure you'll agree that the founding fathers of the West that apportioned Africa and then painted this picture of Africa being allegedly as small as it is pictured at the moment, did it for a reason. Now, so I suppose that for me is potentially where the resistance would stem from. But I want to talk about the implications of teaching children across the world, particularly the continent, what are the implications of using a distorted map of Africa?
Well, so over the years, over the centuries of colonialism and all those, both African students and African citizens have grown accustomed to being seen as diminished, as small, as below everybody else, and visually manifested with a map that is not correctly reflect the size and the size of the continent. I think psychologically, in many ways, that have had an effect on how Africans see themselves as second-class citizens in the global stage. By recorrecting all this, we are taking back agency. We are showcasing that we are we are equal, if not bigger than the rest of the other continents. We are telling our story ourselves, and by not going back to the table in 1884 and setting our own, we're also speaking about agency, that we are now taking responsibility for where this continent should go. And I think that's a very good story to tell for the unborn child, for the child roaming the streets today, who's wondering what their future is going to look like in an Africa that is always portrayed as poor, as at war, as unstable. Now we are telling the story that for us to overcome those challenges, we are going to have to take responsibility as Africans ourselves.
Now, final thoughts, Thebe, before we let you go. How might decolonizing the map reshape Africa's place in global geopolitics and economics? I mean, in the last few months, veiled threats and some more explicit have come out of the United States on the position that certain African countries have chosen to take, and with possible repercussions.
Well, just looking at the population size, Africa accounts for 19% of the population of the world, which is second largest, but only 2% of the GDP, which is among the lowest. So I think as part of where the world should be headed, where Africa should be headed, this gives us one from a physical manifestation. It says you are stronger, you are bigger. But also it says if you account for 20% or so of the world's population, you should be accounting for 20% of the GDP, the same way that China does. I think from a geopolitical perspective, yes, this is going to face some opposition in terms of the cartographic or geographic representation of the map. Because remember, now we have to, because we're now not going just against us Africans within ourselves, because within the context of the world. So of course it's a new battle that we have to face, but it's been going now for a couple of years. The battle of the size. I'm more about not just the battle of the size, I'm more about the battle of the mind. Because if we can help Africans to understand as Africans that we are strong, that we are independent, we are powerful, we'll be able to overcome any of these geopolitical challenges that we're facing, and we'll be able to make friends with whoever we want to make friends with, and we'll be able to use our resources to the best request of the continent and not at the behest of everybody else outside of the continent.